So why don't we go ahead and get started? I'll just introduce myself again. I'm Kate Zulo. I'm the educator here at the Litchfield Historical Society. And this is our partnership lecture series with the League of Women Voters. This is one of my favorite lecture series that we do, just because, Marianne, it's wonderful to work with the League with you. And we always are so lucky to have these really great topics to discuss. So without further ado, Marianne, I'll turn it over to you to introduce our topic and our speakers for today.
That's great. Thank you so much. Hi, everyone. Good afternoon, and thank you for joining us. My name is Marianne Sieber, and I'm president of the League of Women Voters of Litchfield County. And I'd like to welcome you to our program this afternoon, Dis and Misinformation in the Media, educating readers on recognizing it and avoiding it. The League is a political, nonpartisan organization welcoming a diverse membership, regardless of gender, gender identity, or political perspective or affiliation. We study issues rather than supporting political parties, agendas, or candidates. The League has been recognized for its work in fostering civic engagement and education through forums just like this. Our hope is that our efforts will help shape public policy, support needed legislation, and promote informed citizenship at all levels of government. This year, the League of Women Voters of Litchfield County decided to continue our efforts in areas of education. In fulfilling that goal, we are co-sponsoring a virtual lecture series with our partner, the Litchfield Historical Society. And as Kate mentioned, this is the second in our series of 3. For more information about our League chapter and our upcoming events, or to become a member, please visit our website, litchfieldlwv.org. 2 commercials before I let the program continue. Our third lecture in this series will be held on March 19th, where we will be discussing gun violence in Connecticut. And our second commercial is our annual luncheon will be held this year at Crystal Peak in Winstead on April 22nd. And we will have Mr. Bill Curry, former candidate for governor in Connecticut and a former special counsel in the Clinton administration. And he will be discussing his prime subject these days called hidden consensus. He believes that we have more in common than we disagree upon, and this is what we're going to talk about. Again, that's April 22nd. Tickets are $50 a person to full luncheon at the Crystal Peak. So thank you very much. So now to introduce our panelists. We have Bruce Putterman, the CEO and publisher of the Connecticut Mirror. Thank you so much. We have Marie Shanahan, who is a UConn professor who recently said she had her largest audience at the CDC doing a workshop talking about this Saul, having over 300 participants. And we also have Amanda Crawford, who loves to talk about conspiracy and politics. And she's going to talk about how the disinformation actually gets out there and how these guys get their job done. So I thank all 3 of you for joining us today and doing this event for the League and for the Historical Society. So John, I think I'll hand it over to you. Or I'm sorry, Bruce, hand it over to you.
Okay, well, thank you, Marianne, and thanks, Kate, to both the League and to the Litchfield Historical Society. We're thrilled to be able to talk with you about something that all 3 of us are passionate about, which is accurate, fair, balanced information in the media. And so since Marianne has teased Marie's CDC presentation, we're just going to turn right to that. So Marie, take it away.
Okay, thanks everybody. So I'm going to share my screen so you can see some slides from my presentation. Let's see. Okay, so if everybody can see that, let me know. And so I thought that I'd start today by asking everyone here to think about their daily information diet. So what are your daily information habits and how have they changed especially because of the digital age. So, for me, first thing, I wake up in the morning, I roll over and I grab my iPhone and I start looking at it. So I look at my mail, I look at notifications that have come through, my mail may have newsletters in it, and then I open up social media. My social media platforms of choice at this time are Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, and LinkedIn. A lot of my students at UConn, they look at TikTok. So when I'm scrolling through and I'm getting all this information, I'm definitely multitasking. I'm not giving a ton of my attention to one thing. I'm really just skimming. And when something catches my attention, I might actually go search for more information about it. And I like to think that all of those clicks and searches that I do are made out of curiosity. But the truth is that I often seek out more information about something that I saw because it stirred up some sort of emotion in me. Either I'm scared by it, or I'm delighted, I'm laughing, or I feel empathetic, or I'm amused, or I'm angry, or I'm anxious. And those feelings are going to compel me sometimes to like a post, to comment on a post, or to share that information with other people in my own network. So I may share it on my own Facebook page, share it on my Twitter feed, text it to my friends, share it with my colleagues at UConn. And so those are the things that are pushing my information out there, where I'm not just consuming it, I'm actually a producer too. I'm also sharing it. And that's a big difference from the way media used to work years ago. So my information habits, my access to information and my interaction with it has definitely changed because of the internet, because of social media. And I started my career, if you don't know, as a print newspaper reporter. So things are very different. Recommendations that I get from my family and my friends and my colleagues, or from the algorithm that I'm using, that's controlling what I see on Twitter or Facebook, all those things have suddenly become very important. And those things directly impact the information that I'm exposed to. And because most of us really have this unfettered, ubiquitous access to information, because we all carry around this thing with us all the time, search and social media give us a real sense of empowerment. Like, I can control what I take in, what I search for. Empowerment is very engaging. It is self-efficacy. And so think about, who do you believe and why do you believe them? And oftentimes trust is a big deal. Trust in the media, trust in your government, trust in your politicians, trust in science, right? Trust in who is sharing the information is a major factor. And sometimes if the person sharing with me is one of my best friends or one of my colleague who I really respect, then I'm going to give my trust more to the person who shared it with me than it may be from the actual primary source. So if we think about that, how we're giving our trust to the people we know, the organizations we trust already, then there's some things that, like, bad stuff can happen in that space. Distrust is an equally powerful factor. So think about, like, people distrust the media, you distrust scientists, you distrust the government. And so all of those things are contributing to whether or not you take in information and you believe it, or you take it in and you don't believe it and you are debunking it and putting it out there. And so, there's some things about trust that we can learn. According to, there's professors of psychology who are much smarter than me in this area, but one, Norbert Schwartz, who's at USC, talked about 5 criteria that people use when they're trying to decide whether information is true. One is compatibility with other known information. So you've heard it before, makes sense. The credibility of the source. Again, if you don't trust the news, then you're not going to trust it no matter what. If you trust your friend, then maybe you do trust it. Whether others believe it. So your community, your social circle, if they all believe the thing, then you're more likely to believe it too, because you want to be part of that group. Now, whether the information is internally consistent with your own beliefs. So if it goes against sort of the things that you already believe, that you were raised to believe, that you've always believed, then it's gonna be harder for you to take something in that may conflict with that. And then, of course, whether there's supporting evidence. For us in journalism and in academia, we're always about, it's the evidence, it's the facts. If I can back it up, then it must be true. But that's not always true with the public. I'll explain why in a second. So there's 2 keywords that the title of this talk and that you hear out there, and I wanted to distinguish what is the difference between the 2. So one is disinformation, and you've also heard misinformation. So what's the difference between disinformation and misinformation. So with great respect to another academic who I admire, Claire Wardle, and she is at the Brown School of Public Health. She has helped to define these two things. They're both incorrect information. However, the motivation for sharing the content and the actors who share it are very different. Disinformation is intent. It is the deliberate intent to deceive and manipulate the public people. Disinformation is spread explicitly to cause confusion or lead a target audience to believe something that is a lie. So disinformation contains outright lies, no element of truth. Disinformation has a close cousin called malinformation. Malinformation is actually stuff that may be based on some facts, but it's manipulated and taken out of context to mislead. So it might be, for example, an old story that, they strip the date off of it and they make it look new. So you think it's happening right now, but it actually happened 10 years ago. All right. And that also often happens with photos too, where photos get reintroduced. They're really from a long time ago. People think it's happening right now, causes panic and confusion. So who are the people that spread disinformation and malinformation? Well, you got propagandists, you have terrorists, you have dishonest politicians and public officials, deliberate manipulators who are members of corporations or marketing, unscrupulous members of the partisan media, all right, foreign state actors. And you also have, wellness hucksters like physicians and stuff who are just trying to sell their snake oil, so to speak. And so to use a health metaphor, disinformation is the germ. So we're all familiar with germs and viruses in our current state of pandemic, right? So if disinformation is the germ, then misinformation is the infection. So when you're tricked by a disinformation agent and you share that content, it becomes misinformation. And that includes me. I'm a journalist. And if I get tricked by disinformation and I share it, now I've shared misinformation. I didn't want to share bad information. That's not my intent, but I was tricked, so I did. So you're not necessarily the bad actor because you didn't realize you were being manipulated or deceived when you passed along. Your intentions may have been good. You were duped. Germs don't move by themselves. Germs depend on people and their habits and their environment and their interactions with others. The internet is the viral part of the problem, especially social media. So digital communication technology enables and powers what we're calling the infodemic that's out there. And misinformation replicates by going through hubs. You share it with your 500 friends on Facebook. One of your 500 friends on Facebook shares it with their 500 friends. And that's how it replicates. And it can spread in large swaths like that, especially if, say, a news organization picks it up, a journalist writes a story, gets shared to that gigantic audience, or it can actually linger in what we call the long tail, where it's being shared person to person, group to group, and it never sort of gets eradicated, or it can pop up again. All right. So, when we think about propaganda, conspiracy theories, rumors, all that stuff, it's not something new that just happened because we got the internet. This stuff has been around for a long time. But the difference is that because we have social media and the internet and political polarization of so many topics, it's made it so much easier for disinformation to become misinformation and get spread and become entrenched. And so the dissemination part has really been supercharged. And because information sharing and, hanging out with your community resides in all of us because we carry around this thing at home, at work, on the go, the receivers of information, us, right? The audience, we're really easy to manipulate now too, because we're connected all the time. And so information consumption as well, if any of you who are on social, that kind of stuff used to be private. We weren't sharing what we were sharing, but now it's very public because my friends and family, everyone who follows me on my social channels can see what I'm doing. They can see what I'm sharing. And so because they can see it, then they might want to click on it or read it, and then they get exposed to it. We're amplifying the information all the way along. So these are some fun games I have in my office. Amanda, I have not actually opened any of these yet because of the pandemic, but I wanted to have a game afternoon with students one of these days. So what we like and comment on and share on social, because it's visible and then gets amplified, these are very performative forces, right? So these are social performative forces are powerful. They create, produce, reproduce, and spread messages that may be from bad actors. Why do bad actors create disinformation? Money, political gain, to cause confusion, right? So mistrust. Even in stuff that we think is settled, like settled science is no longer settled. Now it's a question again. Disinformation, as I mentioned before, it's exploitative. It tries to use our religion, our patriotism, our desire for social justice to outrage us and dupe us into faulty reasoning. What is it that moves disinformation along? Well, it's us, because we shared it. It's also language and modeling from authority figures, which Amanda can certainly talk about. It's social norms that put pressure on us to take action. So if everyone in my community group is sharing and doing things related to this topic, even though I'm like, I don't know if I believe that, you feel pressured to participate. And just repetition. If you hear it over and over and over again, you start to believe it to be true. Bad actors also use journalists to get, to their advantage to get more media coverage. Journalists try to debunk things. By debunking them, we actually sometimes give it more air. We give it more amplification. So it's really important for us to differentiate between the bad actors who are actually steering the false narrative and the people who unknowingly, maybe they're members of our families, are sharing false information. Why do people share misinformation? Because they're scared, because they want to protect people that they care about. The most successful problematic content manipulates people's emotions, playing on their feelings of anger, fear, or superiority. So, and people who also unknowingly share misinformation, they think they're helping. They want to be a part of their community and they're trying to help their friends and family. Our human desire for shared understanding can often outweigh our desire for truth. So, audiences, we're part of the problem. I just want to show you this gigantic number that I discovered, that this is how much information is like being put out there. And it's being put out there not just because, journalists are creating content. Everyone's creating content. So there's tons and tons more content than there ever was before. And none of us are sort of passively waiting for the news anchor at 6:30 to tell us what's going on. All of us are doing our own searches. And we aren't just consumers, we are active and we are reactive to the information. So most of us, like I said at the start, that we aren't sort of listening to anything either. We're not reading deeply, we're not listening deeply. And so by trying to debunk the problem, that's what journalists do. Amanda knows, like we aim to keep the record straight, but debunks, unfortunately, research has shown, don't actually spread nearly as quickly as the bad information. And debunking information, the reason I have a picture of the seven-headed Hydra is because it feels like that. You chop off one head, and while 100 more versions and alternatives are being reproduced and shared in public and private networks, our well-meaning efforts to debunk actually might spread it more. And if a debunk actually gets to you and you kind of have believed the debunk, erasing that information from your brain is a real struggle because human brains don't work rationally. We want them to, but they don't. And so there's lots of psychological forces working to keep people entrenched in their beliefs. All right. And because we have a flood of information coming at us all the time, we rely on mental shortcuts to compensate for that. Here are a couple of them. Reputation and familiarity. They're powerful persuasive factors when we get messages. Endorsement. If other people found it credible, then I'm more likely. Like if a bunch of my journalist friends all share something with me, I'm more likely to read it because they shared it. Consistency. Again, if it's being echoed. And also self-confirmation. Whether a message confirms my beliefs, then I am going to engage with it and share it because it's now confirmed who I am as a person. I don't know if anybody's seen this fun meme out there, but Redditors had a lot of fun with it. They stripped off what was actually written there, and now you can put your own words. But shows that facts can make an impression, right? But they don't matter for decision making, especially for members of the public who already distrust the organization that's doing the fact check. So if you think about news media, so the Connecticut Mirror might be awesome and they might do an incredible fact check, but if you don't trust the Mirror already, then you're not going to believe it. And so for many people, a challenge to their worldview feels like an attack on their personal identity, and it can cause them to really harden their position. Anxiety really magnifies this in the spread. And I'm not going to get into all the details of all these things, but you can see some keywords here about some of the psychological forces at work that are keeping people entrenched in their beliefs. Belief perseverance, you're not going to, basically all of these basically say that you avoid or discredit any information that may challenge your current worldview, excuse me. So all of these things are happening You're cherry picking information. You're refusing to believe it. You're outright just like not paying attention, discounting it. There's also this phenomenon where even after misinformation is corrected, you still won't believe it. That you just have this, you've heard it so many times. How could the other side be true? And this one is the one that makes me the saddest. And I hear this from college students, that they're just overwhelmed and that they know that this is a problem and it's just too big and they don't have the power to change it. So they don't do anything. That's the worst thing that we can do, because keeping it real is a full-time job. Like, all of us have a responsibility to deal with this problem. And there's no simplistic solutions. My colleague Amanda can tell you all about that. Evidence-based information is a public good in this very disorderly digital age. And so we need a multi-pronged approach that involves the platforms, like all the social media platforms, Google, governments, educators, public officials, journalists, and everyone who's an individual member of the community. We know that there's bad actors, and we need to do more to stop them systemically from infecting everybody else. And I'll stop there.
Great, thanks, Marie.
You're welcome.
So that was fascinating, and I'm sure there's questions, and we'll get to those. Well, we have 2 questions in the chat. Are there immediate questions? No. So why don't we pivot then to Amanda? You just kind of teed Amanda up, and Amanda, if you could, just share with us a little bit about the anatomy of a conspiracy theory and how did the bad actors do their thing. Kind of building off of what Marie said in terms of then how it gets perpetuated through viral networks, or anything else you want to talk about.
Sure. So to riff off a couple of things that Marie was talking about, she ended there with that illusory truth effect, or you said you call it continued influence effect. It's also called the illusory truth effect, which is the idea that if you hear something over and over and over again, you are going to believe it. And certainly this is something we're seeing, obviously, with social media. You have all these different realms where disinformation can spread, and you can see it posted from all these different, and they could be multiple bots or multiple sources, and people are picking it up and reiterating it. And so it has that effect of constantly, being out there. Something to consider is that the internet doesn't forget anything, and that most everything that's been put out there, whether it was a mistake or whether it was true, is still out there. So those could be outdated reports by the media that can be then picked up and repurposed by bad actors to try to manipulate us. So that's taking a source you do trust and manipulating it so that it's being used for you to guide you towards a disinformation point to something that's not true. So I have spent a lot of time researching misinformation and disinformation around mass shootings and related to gun violence. And so one of the things we see with mass shootings, since we're in Connecticut, most people remember the Sandy Hook shooting that happened in 2012. And one of the reasons that I have studied that is because it came at a really important point in what we're looking at, like the evolution of this kind of disinformation, misinformation era that we're in. The shooting happened the same year that a majority of Americans were on social media for the first time. It also happened when we hit a record low in trust for the mainstream media. So what we saw is those two things combined. Suddenly there's these social media networks that information can spread on really quickly, that have a lot of bad actors, kind of using them and ready to manipulate them, and an unsophisticated pool of people who are just new to this new world of social media and maybe not sure how to distinguish truth from fiction. And then you also have a high level of distrust of the mainstream media. So if you have the mainstream media telling you what has happened, you have all this disinformation out here on social media, skewing that, manipulating it, taking mistakes that might have been made in mainstream media coverage and using that as proof that something nefarious is happening. So when we see mass shooting denial or doubts about those kind of any kind of major, today, all high-profile mass casualty events are surrounded by disinformation and misinformation that's trying to persuade you that the government is doing something shady and this isn't, the media is lying to you. And so we see that, growing after each of these events. And so often they'll take the real information and twist that and use that as, like I said, proof that something else is happening. And so it becomes, incumbent upon us to be trying to figure out our sources and checking things, but that can be harder than it sounds. I'm a journalist, so I know how to use data, and I think that I'm fairly good at figuring out facts. But sometimes I'm surprised when I see friends or students and how they use the search engines that Marie was talking about. Instead of, trying to find a legitimate source, factual source or data. Sometimes people often put in the thing is it true that Sandy Hook was fake? Well, if you put in something like that, you get all those kind of responses that validate that perspective. We've seen that with Holocaust denial. And as someone that I've worked with who does has a nonprofit that goes after fake content, he always makes the point that there is not a lot of answers to a question that said, yes, the Holocaust happened, because that history has already existed. We feel confident in that, but there's tons of sites that if you Google, did it happen, right? You get that negative disinformation back instead of that real information in the history, because it's not the way that we should be using those sources. It's not intended to just find anything that answers that question or has that question in the blog, right? That's not the best way to find information. So I guess I want to make one other point, since I'm just kind of spewing some information at you, some ideas that came from listening to Marie's great presentation. But I think when we're talking in the political context, what we're seeing today that I think is where we should all be most concerned is when there are people in areas of power, our elected officials, who are willing to disregard facts, are willing to operate in disinformation to gain power and to win. Marie was saying some of the reasons why do we believe, false information? Well, because it confirms our existing beliefs, right? Well, why do people in power, politicians, I'd say particularly, why did they spread information that they know is not true? Or why does Fox News spread information they know is not true? And I say that not to be political, but we just have a whole bunch of information that came out in a major lawsuit against Fox News that we know they knew President Donald Trump had lost the election, but they were afraid of making people angry because they knew they would run up against that confirmation bias. And so they were afraid of making them angry, so they continued to perpetuate disinformation at that point. And so why do people spread that? Well, they want to win. They want to win the political argument. They want to win the public policy fight. They want to win elected office. They want you to donate to their campaign. And so I think, quite honestly, we have to do the things that Marie suggested. We have to be really cautious about the information we interact with online, the information we share, the information we believe. But oh boy, what we really have to do is hold our elected officials accountable, because it is unconscionable to have people in Congress echoing some of the disinformation that is extremely detrimental to society and to democracy. That was my rant.
So, Amanda, I'm interested I'm interested in everything you said, but one thing in particular. So you kind of gave a very helpful hint in terms of how to go about searching and processing search results. I think just to maybe bring this down then to a very practical level for people who are on the Zoom today, I think there's this misconception somehow that search display results somehow rank the reliability or the trustworthy of the results. And that is not true generally, because those results can be partially manipulated by the people who are posting them. So can either of you talk about that a little bit in lieu of looking at order? What should people be looking for in terms of assessing what's trustworthy and what's not trustworthy?
Sources. I mean, that would be one of the things. I know Maria probably have something to add on this because she just was talking to the CDC. But I mean, if you want information about a communicable disease, look for the CDC, look for the .gov. Don't look for Blogspot, Blogger at whatever, or WordPress, some blog site, or some random doctor that you have no way to verify if they're a doctor or not. Just because their about page says they're a doctor doesn't mean they're a doctor. That's how disinformation works. We have to really be conscious of these sources and make good decisions. Now, the problem with that is some people trust really bad sources. Like they should, the CT Mirror should generate, trust, and it does for a lot of people. But there is certainly a segment of society doesn't trust any journalists, and they don't trust the government, and they don't trust doctors, and they don't trust scientists, and they don't trust professors. Well, who do they trust? Whoever says what they want to hear. And that is, hard to combat.
So Bruce, you also mentioned, basically these are critical thinking skills. And, Amanda and I, both being journalism professors, we teach our students, when you're presented with a piece of information or you're looking at a source, you basically have to interview the source itself. So one thing is obviously Google search results from any, search engine can be manipulated by the algorithm itself. So figuring out the order of the keywords that you put in, depending on how you put them in and which order, you're going to get different kinds of results. So if you ask a question like what Amanda said, where it frames it as it's not actually settled history, there's a question there, then you're going to get those kind of results because people have filled up this information space that was empty if you asked that question before. So it's interesting, when I was talking to the folks at the CDC, I was thinking about when I Google some health information, I think that's very common. All of us like, I'm not feeling good. Let me see if I put in my symptoms, what's going to come up. So we're using the internet basically as our medical encyclopedia, not always a great idea. But when I search for something, what comes up first? It's not the CDC. And I said that to them. I'm like, you don't come up first. What comes up first? It's usually like WebMD, Healthline, the Mayo Clinic, and then Wikipedia is in there. And I said, does the CDC check the Wikipedia entries to make sure that they're accurate? Because the internet is such, and so is Wikipedia, that anyone can go in and edit articles on Wikipedia. If you actually are the authority, do you have a responsibility then to make sure, since that is a place where a lot of people will find information, to make sure, like, keep the record straight, make sure that it's true. If what WebMD has listed is wrong or doesn't include a link to the CDC, should you approach them and say, hey, what you published here is wrong, you should link to us, you should include this information. So some of that is sort of like guerrilla warfare, again, and it would take a long time. But other things that you think about when you come across a piece of information, this is what I teach my students: who's the author and who's the original author, not just, Amanda reposted it because Bruce reposted it because somebody else reposted it. No, that's like three, you can have 6 degrees of separation. Who actually created it and posted it? Why did they post it? What was the date of the posting? Okay, so knowing how old it is can also sort of, and is it something that other people are saying? Does it match with, the stuff that's already out there, or is it completely in left field? And this is the same for like images and other things that you may find online. Is this actually the original photo, or has it been manipulated? Because I'm really good at Photoshop, and I can Photoshop my head on Bruce's body if I want to and make it look really good. Okay. And so the internet is a playground because humans are subversive and they like to, make themselves laugh. But at the same time, as Amanda said, people are also using it for evil intent. And you don't want to be, an agent of theirs. So ask good questions. Just be a critical thinker.
So let me ask you a question. So one of you talked about kind of mental shortcuts that we all take. And branding is a mental shortcut, I think. Mm-hmm. In terms of creating trust. And so taking the WebMD and Mayo Clinic examples, Mayo Clinic, I guess for me, I trust them implicitly. WebMD, I kind of trust, but I am not quite as sure as I am about Mayo Clinic, which, WebMD feels like, and I shouldn't say this as the publisher of a digital native organization, but WebMD is a digital native, and who knows what could have gone wrong in that process. So I have some trust, but not like total trust, I guess. And so, for us at the Connecticut Mirror, and for people who are on the webinar who don't know who we are a nonprofit, nonpartisan news organization that covers public policy in Connecticut. As other newspapers and especially state house press corps have shrunk over the last 15 years or so, the Connecticut Mirror has emerged to fill that void. And we do consumer research every year, and our trust numbers are going up and up and up, which is great. 73% of people give us kind of the highest level of trust on the 5-point scale question that we ask. And as I think about what have we done to build our brand to achieve that level of trust, I think a lot of it is just the basics of journalism, right? We have bylines, we have email addresses on our site, we have a thorough, an about page, we list all of our donors on the site. So I think that's what readers or consumers of news can also be looking for. Can you contact the person? Is the person identified? Can you contact that person? Do you know how they're funded? And over time, you build up some level of trust. I also think for us, Amanda, to your point, we use data a lot, and I think people kind of infer some level of trustworthiness from actual use of data. We do long form journalism, so that I think creates some trust. But I'd be curious to hear each of you or one of you talk a little bit about just the role of a brand, a well-known brand. That's question one. And then question two, related to that is, we're all told, and we all know we should do this, which is read opinions and perspectives that are different from our opinions and perspectives. But chances are we're not going to know the brands on the other side of that political spectrum well enough to be able to know what brands to trust and what brands not to trust. So I guess the short version of that is, can you talk a little bit about the role of branding in trust building?
I guess branding is a little bit, it's a shortcut, right? It's the shortcut to, I know the Connecticut Mirror, so therefore I trust them, right? Or I know the New York Times, and therefore if the New York Times has its stamp on it, I trust them.
Right.
And I don't know that that's a bad thing, except that, at a national level, we see the branding tied into tribalism. And so, but then it becomes part of the polarization. And so then it's, I believe anything that comes out of these brands because they're in this tribe and not these. And that's been really detrimental. It certainly was not a utopia of, all truth prior to social media or the internet. I'm not going to say that. There was a lot we didn't know. There's a lot of good that's come out of the democratization of the internet and the democratization of information that we have because of the internet and social media and that openness to publishing. But it also means that we're not all on the same page anymore. We don't all trust a particular brand. Like there's not a, you often hear that there's not a Walter Cronkite, but it's far beyond that. There's not, the same kind of trust about media in general or an information sources or government and all of those things. And that has divided us, our perspectives of reality. I don't know how branding necessarily gets us beyond that, but I think it is a concern that does tie into tribalism sometimes as well.
Right. No, fair.
I don't know if that's what you're getting at or not, but
no, that's kind of the counterpoint to the value of a brand, because brands, the way brands have kind of emerged, I guess, in the media ecosystem is that brands are imbued with kind of political values as opposed to all being, neutral players. That's part of the issue related to trust in general. That people don't, and the reason trust numbers are declining, as you pointed out, I guess, is that, and the data suggests that, lack of trust in media, while it's declined across the board significantly, it's declined more for Republicans and independents than it has for people who identify as Democrats.
Well, and that's been part of a concerted effort.
Just consistent messaging that says don't trust.
Yeah,
exactly. So there's been a consistent messaging for 40 plus years that says the media is liberal, don't trust them. And so that's a illusory truth effect. That is something that has caught on among conservatives really strongly. And we just can, only hope that we see, other ways to break through that divide.
Right. And trust in local media is actually still higher than the national media. So a local news organization like the Connecticut Mirror is not necessarily, I know that Bruce, sometimes you get letters to the editor, but you're not really seen as this polarized political organization, and that you do try your best to cover many perspectives of whatever the story is, including having, your viewpoint section. So local media is still faring better because you're a member of our community. Like, you live here in Connecticut and you're not sort of this, in an ivory tower reporting on, the whole nation. So.
Yeah, no, I think that's right. I think, oh, I'm sorry, go ahead, Amanda.
No, I was just say that I think that we have great local news sources here in Connecticut. And I think that is really key, as Marie said, to having your regional trust. I will warn that the bad actors know that we trust local media. And so we're seeing across the country. I don't think I've seen it here, but we've seen it especially in some news deserts in the South, where you have political operatives and disinformation purveyors creating what look like local newspapers because they're playing on that trust. And there are a ton of websites across the internet that look like local TV stations, but are not. And so they're playing on that idea. This is a local publication, I can trust it. So we have to be alert for that too. And so maybe that's where you're branding with the Connecticut Mirror, that we should trust you, and that you've earned that comes into play,
Yeah, no, that's right. And we are on guard for that. Connecticut, interestingly, you mentioned the concept of news deserts. What a news desert means, folks, is, a geographic area, significant geographic area that doesn't have a newspaper. And you guys probably know the data better than I, but I think 200 counties in this country that don't have a newspaper in them, which is, kind of craziness. So we don't have that in Connecticut. There are 17 daily newspapers in Connecticut. 14 of them actually are licensed to republish our content, which helps actually enhance the trust in the Connecticut Mirror. If the other newspapers trust us, that's also a nice credential. But so, Maria, I'm sorry, were you going to say something on this topic, or should we move on?
No, I don't have anything else to say on the topic.
Okay, great. So we have a question in the chat. Free press is being threatened by legislation to weaken legal standards that protect this right in reporting on politicians and public figures. I assume you mean freedom of information. Hearst just did a big piece on the city of Bridgeport stonewalling freedom of information requests for a long time. And the questioner asks, what is your response to this challenge? Also, how can we learn to distinguish what is true and what is false? We've talked a little bit about that. But in terms of the FOI question, Marie, that's obviously at the heart of this trust and misinformation question to some degree. What is your response to this challenge? Asks.
Yeah, Amanda and I are both members of organizations that fight for freedom of information, which is, the public's right to know what your elected officials and government agencies and everything, what they're doing. And so, all journalists are very involved. We also have the support of lawyers and other, organizations that are protecting the public's right to know what's going on. Journalists do it on behalf of the public, but it means that if any member of the public wanted to go in and to get a piece of information that has been paid for by taxpayer dollars, you should have the right to see that. And Amanda teaches our media law class at UConn, so she can speak to this stronger than I can, but go ahead, Amanda.
Well, certainly having access to information from our government and what they're doing is critical to our understanding. Before we got on this chat, Bruce and I were chatting, and he had noticed that in my bio, I said I study the role of journalists in democracy. And so, the role of the journalists in our democracy, what it was always intended to be, the reason there's a free press protection in the First Amendment, is that the founders recognized that to have this this open government, to have this system where, we all participate in electing our officials and setting public policy in that way, to have a democratic republic and have that participatory democracy, that citizens needed to be informed. And that's where a free press comes into play, to provide you with that information. Well, if we're getting stonewalled by governments that aren't open about what they're doing or why they're doing it, or the facts that they've obtained, that can stifle that ability to keep the public informed. I will say I'm curious. I think the questioner, though, I'm wondering if they were asking about legal standards to protect reporting as far as libel goes. That's how I read that question, Bruce. I don't know. if the person was asking that, but that's there is a concerted effort for, to try to make it easier to sue the media when they make unintentional mistakes. Right now, under the New York Times v. Sullivan standard, if reporters are writing about politicians or during an investigation and they get something small wrong, that it's not as easy to sue them and put them, to bankrupt them, as you will. And there is a concerted effort to, try to go after the mainstream media more by making it easier to sue them. I don't support that. I've had people ask if that would make it easier to fight disinformation. It won't. So I'm not sure if that's what they were asking about or not, but.
No, actually rereading it, I think that's right. Yeah.
I mean, we need a robust press to hold the government accountable, but we also need an honest press. And so I think it's really interesting, as someone who follows media law and what's going on in the courts, I think watching a lot of the court cases that are happening right now will really show us how, how resilient the institution of our judiciary is and being able to help us fight disinformation. So we obviously saw the Alex Jones trial where you have a big disinformation purveyor being hit with the hammer of a big penalty for his intentional lies that hurt people's reputation. And now we're seeing a lawsuit against Fox News by Dominion Voting for Fox, perpetuating what they knew to not be true about the results of the 2020 election. And there are several other lawsuits against folks who were spreading, election lies. And so we'll see how robust the, and resilient the judiciary can be in kind of, enforcing our standards, which is that you are entitled to your opinion. And you are entitled to be wrong. And you can even say, say opinions that are not based on reality if you want. But when you start making statements of fact that hurt people's reputation and cause harm, then we've always through British common law had redress in the courts for that. So we'll see if that's going to work in this era.
Yeah, the other interesting legal case is what was before the Supreme Court this week in terms of Section 230. And for those folks who don't know, Section 230 basically was passed in the dawn of the internet, which gives the platforms like Facebook and Google immunity from any kind of libel. Their point being, we're just like a telephone. We just transmit information. And the argument, of course, is, well, you don't just transmit information. As we talked about earlier, there's recommendations. It's one thing if you're just going to organize information, Facebook. It's another if you're going to serve up certain information to certain people based on their interest. And that case was argued before the Supreme Court. And I guess the hope is if Section 230 is amended, that will go some distance toward maybe helping to mitigate some of the trust and misinformation and disinformation issues. But I guess that remains to be seen.
Yeah, but the liability is a problem. So even you, Bruce, by posting people's viewpoints on the Connecticut Mirror or allowing online comments, you become like, Google or Facebook. You become, like an internet service provider where it's those third-party comments. If someone says something defamatory in a comment section on the Connecticut Mirror, the Mirror won't get sued for that because you're not liable because you didn't say it. Right. If one of your reporters said it, that's one thing. But if it was just some person from the public using your platform, then no. Yeah. So, it's a tough balance because, Section 230 came about in order to help the internet grow, that it would be a place where everyone could speak and there wouldn't be constant litigation. And the fear is if any type of change to it will cause constant litigation. But, I think there's tweaks that can be made because it's almost made everyone irresponsible. Yeah. Like clearly it has.
Well, it's kind of a twofer. Section 230 of the Communication Decency Act says that you can't sue an internet service provider if someone like Marie said, in the comments libels you. But it also says that an internet service provider can't be held accountable if they decide they want to delete stuff. So it's a safe harbor provision. So the concern is if you strike down Section 230, then you'll either have sites that either delete a ton of content and really censor or do no censorship at all. And suddenly you're in really bad, the stuff we all kind of agree shouldn't be there, like child porn or something, so there's this kind of distinguish there. So it's a big challenge that our regulators have not shown themselves up to the task for, because it's confusing, it's technological. And, I don't know if you've seen any of the hearings where members of Congress try to talk about the internet, but it's not a stellar conversation.
Right. I
I
mean,
they're like,
even-
wait a minute, what does
Yeah.
it mean when you like something? So I think there's a long way to go, but I saw someone in the chat asked about algorithms. And so at the heart of that Google v. Gonzalez is the idea of, okay, can we hold them at least responsible for how their algorithms cause things to be shared? Because we have to remember that too often we boil down the idea of what's happening online to an issue of free speech. It's not about free speech. For multiple reasons. First off, they're private platforms of a private company, but take that out of it. It's also this idea of freedom of reach. You have a right to say anything, but should Facebook and Twitter amplify what you say? Because what you say stirs the emotions, like Marie said. So they take, it's controversial. It's going to get a lot of engagement, even if it's wrong or, awful or ugly or vile. It's going to get engagement. Their algorithms are programmed to send that out to the entire world, right? In a minute. And that's that freedom of reach. And so when we have these conversations, we boil them down to this, like, I have a right to say something and post it on Twitter. But really it's this idea of, where is that, this idea of this amplification of algorithms that don't have the best public discourse in mind.
Right. Okay. So we have 5 minutes left. I want to just invite any other questions. I think we've covered them all. I haven't read them all, but I think Kate, your question we've covered in the conversation. Unless you don't think we have, in which case just chat it or come on. But if there are no other questions, it looks like Marianne, you might have one, or you may want to be wrapping up.
Well, Bruce, I was wondering, since you got to ask the questions, I'm curious as to what question you would like to be asked, or how about if we have Amanda and Marie ask you a question?
Marie is my boss technically, or one of my 16 bosses, because she's on our board. So I'm happy to answer any questions that either of you or any audience members have about the Connecticut Mirror and how we try to do what we do in terms of maintaining trust and transparency. I will say this, as somebody has said, the one big advantage that we have in reporting on state government is no one is paying attention to state government, right? All action in terms of conspiracy theories is either, or at least small state government, a lot of the action is at the national level or in larger states. And so at this point, yes, we're on guard for some of those faux sites that are developing in other parts of the country. But so far, our media ecosystem is still relatively civil, and as is kind of the political establishment across the entire spectrum in Connecticut. So that speaks nicely about people here in Connecticut, I think.
Amanda, you look like you had a question.
Well, with searching for a question, I can ask one always. So, but I think that I always tell people when they're asking how do we rebuild trust in the media, Bruce, I always tell people that journalists have to be better at telling their own story, telling our readers, here's what we did, here's how we do it, here's who we talked to, here's what we know, here's what we don't know, here's what we got wrong last time, and here's what we can correct now, and kind of really being transparent with those efforts. And I was wondering if you find that at the Connecticut Mirror that has helped to build trust with your readers, and whether you've amped that up recently at all. I've seen some organizations are amping up that transparency piece.
Yeah, so we did at one point, so we're a small news organization, as you all know. While we have a lot of, within a certain niche audience of maybe certainly policymakers and policy wonks and people interested in state government and how their state works, we're very well known and highly trusted, but we are not really by any stretch a general audience news organization yet. And so we're a small staff. At one point, we did kind of experiment with an inside the newsroom kind of feature. Like once a month, we did a anatomy of the story, if you will. we couldn't sustain that from a manpower perspective. We are trying to reintroduce that. But what we have done is we've created a feature called CT Mirror Explains. And so a lot of our content, like I said before, is long form, 1,500, 2,000 words, a lot of information. And if you're new to the Connecticut Mirror or to Connecticut in general, there isn't an easy way of entering into a complicated policy story. And so I've always wanted to do kind of a state budget 101 sort of thing. And that's what CT Mirror Explains is designed to do. It takes a 2,000-word story and it distills out kind of the 5 key facts to know about that story. And that has taken on 2 forms. One is kind of just explaining a complex piece of policy. Like the first one we ever did was, what is the abortion safe harbor law that Connecticut passed last summer in response to the Texas, or last spring in response to the Texas law. And then the second variation is like practical stuff, like how do you get your essential worker pandemic relief? Or what do you do if you receive an eviction notice? So the hope there is that by explaining and providing really useful information for people that ultimately is borne out as being true, that builds some trust. But your notion of kind of the how did we do it, that's an additional impetus to try to resurrect that. So thank you.
The Connecticut Mirror Explains feature sounds really important. So I'm glad you're doing that.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks. And if anybody, by the way, any readers have any suggestions for topics that they would like us to explain, oh, I should know this. We have an email address specifically for that. I think it's CT Mirror Explains. Explain this at ctmirror.org. Just shoot us an email and let us know what topic you might want to see explained.
The one question I have about is news deserts. We hear about food deserts where people can't go and purchase real whole foods.
Right.
And you talked about how many counties in the country that don't even have a daily newspaper. So, I mean, I know how we got here, the internet took over and social media took over and that sort of thing. And, people talk about, oh, I'd love holding a newspaper, but people either aren't doing it or they're not able to do it because they're not newspapers sold. So I'm just curious what your wish list looks like to combat the news desert that exists in this country.
Yeah, I mean, it's a serious problem because when there's an information gap, then someone else will fill it. And so that's when you have these different disinformation agents going in there. There are a couple of initiatives that are out there to try and fill those news deserts, including one that the Mirror has participated in, which is Report for America, where it's a nonprofit that actually helps newsrooms get more people, more staff, more reporters in their newsrooms to cover issues that aren't being covered. And they pay for, is it, Bruce, half the salary or the whole salary and then half the salary?
Half the salary in the first year, and then it kind of de-escalates from there for 3 years. Yeah.
Yeah. But a lot, and what's wonderful to hear is that a number of newsrooms in Connecticut have taken advantage of this program. And it's also one that we promote to our students at UConn who want to be journalists, because it's really filling a need. And it's not just young people that are doing it. Sometimes you have veteran journalists that are like, I know what to do. I know how to cover a community. I know how to cover this beat, and I'm going to go work in, rural Kansas to help this out. So, I mean, I do think we're a little bit lucky in Connecticut where we do have a lot of news organizations, and we don't have a lot of news deserts. I mean, there's some towns that really aren't covered. And you think about, where do people in those towns get their information from? Facebook groups, like people yelling at each other, and you have no idea who's the administrator of those groups. So you got to take everything you see in there with a grain of salt, a few of them. So, that's the thing that I think about, is that how do you fill the gap? Especially like when in some ways, like Amanda knows this, like you can sometimes track when a rumor starts taking hold. That's when people start making searches about that thing. If there is an information gap there, someone's going to fill it, and it should be us. It should be a journalist. It should be the Mirror. It should be someone like, it should be the CDC. It should be some honest organization that wants to help people. That's the end game, as opposed to manipulate and hurt them. So, but it's a big challenge, and it's not great. Although I hear there's a new news organization, a newspaper that launched in your area of the state in Litchfield County, the Winstead Citizen.
Yes, that's right.
Funded in part by Ralph Nader, I think.
I was gonna add, because I think that we have these conversations about these really big issues, like the decline of local news and the spread of disinformation and political polarization. And Marianne, when you were setting this up, you were talking about an event you have where a speaker's talking about the hidden consensus. And the reality is that we are far more, all of us, more on the same page than our national political, situation makes it seem that we are. We agree on things in our community, how to make our community better, and that we want the best for our kids and everything else. And we have to find those areas of consensus. Well, you don't find them if the person running for town council is talking about something like the 2020 election, abortion, national assault weapon ban, whatever that's not in their purview. But we're in an area of politics where, we're being divided even at all levels by these giant big issues. And to get past that polarization and get past misinformation, disinformation, it's in part incumbent on us to try to find common ground, to read our local news, to seek out better sources. And so that's how do you fix the internet? You don't. You have to fix us. We all have to do better.
Yeah, that's a perfect way to wrap it up. Thank you so much, Amanda. Marie and Bruce, fabulous presentation, and back and forth was just really quite informative. Really appreciate it all.
My pleasure. Thanks for including us. Margaret, I see you have a question in the Q&A. If you'd like to email me at bputterman@ctmirror.org, I'd be happy to try to take a stab at that. And I might enlist Amanda or Marie in answering. There's a two-part answer to that question. I can answer the part dealing with state agencies and how they use algorithms. Marie and Amanda might be better suited to answer the part about how social media algorithms kind of propagate bad information.
Well, they follow what you want to hear and try to provide you more of it. So if you want to hear, conspiracy rants, they're just going to keep giving you more of it. And they also just play off of your demographics and, like I said, controversy. So it's not a great way of delivering information. It certainly wasn't designed to further better public discourse. It was designed to get us interacting, and being emotional is not always, again, the way to consensus.
Unintended consequences. So one of our attendees, Rich, has made a comment. The Council on Foreign Relations has a valuable series of YouTube videos on the topic of news deserts and local news. So that would be worthwhile. Thank you so much, Rich, for mentioning that. And Kate, did we get it all?
I was going to say, Marianne, you said unintended consequences. The way the algorithms works are totally intended. Well, they intend to send you down those rabbit holes.
I know that's what algorithms, but the unintended consequence of the whole internet. I mean, and social media was to bring us together, to be social, and
but it wasn't. It was to get you to click and interact so they make ad money. That's what it was about. They told us it was to bring us together, right?
But yeah, exactly. The divisiveness is what resulted from it all.
It's like, Facebook is rooted in ranking women on a numerical scale. Like, what could go wrong from there? I mean, that's basically, that, I guess, kind of, those are the roots.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So
awesome. Well, I feel like I have learned a lot today. Thank you guys so much, Amanda, Marie, Bruce. This has been really informative and a wonderful discussion.
And I thank everyone for joining us. If you mark your calendar for March 19th for the final lecture in our winter series with the Litchfield Historical Society, we will have somebody from Preventing Gun Violence in Connecticut to speak about what's going on there. And our annual luncheon, the public is welcome to hear Bill Curry talk about our hidden consensus and how we can actually solve problems together. So I thank you all so very, very much.
All right. Thank you all for being
Yeah,
here.
thank you.
Have a wonderful afternoon.
Great
Bye.
afternoon. Bye, everyone.